Let me rewind for a second. My name's Tyler Kane, born in Gary, Indiana. I'm 37 now. I run 3 logistics companies, 1 real estate development firm, and have just launched a private equity group out of Charlotte. My personal net worth? Depends on the market, but Forbes had me listed last year as a rising titan in transportation. But before all that, I was just another mouth my parents regretted feeding. My mother, Joyce, was a high school dropout with cigarette-stained teeth and a scream that could curdle milk. She had me when she was 19 and bitter about it ever since. My dad, Neil, was a quiet kind of cruel, the type of man who hit you without raising his voice, whose punishments came in cold silences and withheld meals. When I turned 12, they decided I was old enough to earn my keep. That was the phrase. Like I was livestock. At first, it was odd jobs. Dad dragged me to work sites where he did contract roofing and siding for half pay under the table. I carried ladders, hauled buckets of tar up narrow aluminum scaffolds, and held heavy plywood while he screamed if I moved an inch. No pay, of course, just experience. Then came the house flipper gigs. Mom started doing cleanouts for evicted homes. She'd bring me along to rip up carpet, clean feces off bathroom walls, bag up maggot-ridden food from fridges that had been unplugged for weeks. She'd hand me yellow gloves with holes in them and say, "Get in there. Be a man." Again, no money. Not even a thank you. "Your room and board is your paycheck," she told me once, when I finally worked up the courage to ask. "You think living here's free?" I wanted to scream. My room was a 90-degree garage with spider webs on the ceiling and no sheets on the board I slept on. Board was literal, an unfinished piece of plywood they salvaged from a torn-down shed. My pillow was an old coat stuffed into a trash bag. Meanwhile, my little brother Mason, 6 years younger, had a real bed, toys, hot meals, and a door he could shut. They loved him, doted on him, even bragged about him to their friends. I was just the mistake who still hadn't learned gratitude. One day, I was 13 then, I broke down. Cried in front of my dad after he backhanded me for leaving a single streak on a window I'd spent 20 minutes cleaning. I still remember the taste of blood in my mouth, the burning shame of the tears I couldn't stop. He stood over me and said flatly, "You'll never make it out there, Tyler. You're weak. Life will eat you alive." That night, something inside me snapped. Not in a movie way, not some montage of motivation and triumph. No, I snapped quietly, secretly, like a root breaking underground. I started stealing books. I took them from the school library, from neighbors' trash, from the one Goodwill across town that didn't always check your bag on the way out. Business books, technical manuals, accounting primers. I read under a flashlight in the garage after they went to sleep, wrapped in an old quilt that reeked of mildew. I wasn't trying to rebel. I was trying to understand why I was hated. Why some people seemed to succeed while others, like me, were doomed to rot. I devoured every word like a starving dog. Then I found Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Corny title, obnoxious cover. But it changed me. It wasn't the ideas that mattered. It was the permission. The book told me, for the first time in my life, that wanting more didn't make me evil. That I wasn't broken for dreaming beyond my station. So I made a plan. Get out. Build something. Then come back. Not for reconciliation. Not for closure. But to make them kneel. Not through violence. No. That would be too merciful. My revenge would be colder. Cleaner. Success. Undeniable. Inescapable. Irrefutable success. I started by applying for every school program that would keep me away from home. Debate club, computer lab, student council, I didn't care. I volunteered for everything. Not because I loved school. I didn't. I just wanted out of that house. I got my first real job at 15, bagging groceries at Dalton's Market. Minimum wage. No benefits. But they paid me. Cash, sometimes. My parents didn't know about it for 3 months. When they found out, they demanded I give them half. I said no. Dad broke my nose for that. But I didn't quit. I kept working. Hid the money. Saved every cent in a sock duct taped inside the wall behind the hot water heater. I moved out at 17. Told them I'd gotten a scholarship. I hadn't yet, but I would. Took my savings, just under $1,800, and left in the middle of the night. Didn't even leave a note. They didn't call. Didn't chase. Didn't care. And that was fine. Because I had one goal. Win. And make them choke on it. I learned early that the world doesn't care about your bruises. The morning after I left my parents' house, I sat on a Greyhound bus bound for Columbus, Ohio, holding a trash bag with all my clothes and the worn copy of Think and Grow Rich tucked under my arm. The driver didn't ask questions. No one did. When I got off the bus, I walked 3 miles to a halfway house I'd read about in a free local paper I'd picked up at the terminal. It wasn't meant for someone like me. Most of the people there were recovering addicts or just out of jail, but I lied and told them I'd aged out of foster care. The guy running it, a wiry old man named Dennis with a nicotine cough and watery eyes, looked me over and said, "We don't ask questions here. Just don't steal shit, and you clean up after yourself." That was good enough. The room I got was barely more than a closet. It had a mattress with stains I didn't want to think about, a metal chair, and a cracked window that leaked cold. But it had 4 walls, a door, a lock. It felt like a castle. I got a job bussing tables at a low-rent steakhouse called Miller's Barn. It was the kind of place where the steaks came frozen and the waitresses wore too much perfume to cover the stench of fryer grease. But the manager, a chubby, balding guy named Vic, didn't care that I didn't have ID. He paid me in cash and let me eat leftover breadsticks if I stayed late to mop. I saved everything. I lived off canned beans and tuna, used a burner phone, and took public buses to the library every chance I could. I didn't party. I didn't date. I didn't let anyone get close. My plan was simple: build, learn, escape, win. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling tiles and repeat their voices in my head like a twisted mantra. "You're lazy. You'll never make it. You're just not trying hard enough." And each time, I'd picture their faces, my mother with her permanent sneer, my father with his dead stare, and I'd promise myself that I would become something so untouchable, so unfathomably successful, that they'd feel it every time they turned on the damn news. They'd feel small. They'd feel forgotten, just like they made me feel. I enrolled in community college the following year, used a forged utility bill to fake my residency, and scammed my way into financial aid by claiming I was an orphan. Not proud of it, but survival isn't about pride. It's about pressure. I was under it every day, and I learned to treat obstacles like weights. Push against them, and you get stronger. I studied business administration, but I didn't care about the lectures. What I cared about was access to professors, to online databases, to other students who didn't know how valuable the information in their textbooks was. I rented every book I could and photocopied them in the library. I made binders of notes on supply chain models, warehousing logistics, cost analysis, and bootstrap capital management. At night, I watched YouTube videos about drop shipping, warehousing, Amazon FBA, Shopify. And I started to understand the truth about America. This country doesn't reward hard work. It rewards ownership. I didn't want a job. I wanted leverage. I launched my first online business at 19. Canelink Supply, a basic drop-shipping site selling cleaning supplies wholesale to small businesses. I used my college's Wi-Fi, a Squarespace trial, and less than $300 to get started. My first sale was a $72 order of industrial mop heads to a daycare center in Cincinnati. It felt like Christmas. By the end of the first year, I had 400 regular clients. I was managing orders from a laptop in a shared dorm room and shipping through a fulfillment center I'd partnered with out of Akron. I made just under $18,000 that year, legally. Clean. Mine. By 22, I dropped out of college, not because I failed, but because I'd outgrown it. I rented a cheap office in downtown Columbus and used it as Canelink's HQ, got a proper LLC, started investing in local warehousing space. By then, I had 3 part-time employees, all older than me, managing daily orders. I was paying payroll through QuickBooks, negotiating shipping rates with FedEx, and reading Harvard Business Review like it was gospel. But I never let myself forget where I came from. Every dollar I made felt like a step farther from the garage. Every deal closed was another slap in the face of those who told me I'd be nothing. They didn't know what I was doing. Joyce and Neil Kane had no idea their lazy son had gone from folding their laundry to folding acquisition deals. They thought I had run off, and probably figured I was either homeless or dead. I didn't correct them. I did keep tabs on them, though. Social media, public records, property filings, credit pulls. I even paid for access to a private database that let me monitor court filings and debt collections. By 25, I knew they'd defaulted on their mortgage. Lost the house. Joyce had taken a job at a diner outside of Muncie. Neil was working as a part-time mechanic and had racked up more than $30,000 in credit card debt. I smiled when I saw the foreclosure notice. Not because I enjoy suffering, but because justice has a flavor, and for the first time, it was on my tongue. The real turning point came at 27. I landed a contract with a regional grocery chain, Midstar Markets, to handle their sanitation supply needs for 62 locations across Indiana and Ohio. That single deal quadrupled my revenue overnight. I hired a full sales team, got a warehouse, moved into a 2-bedroom condo overlooking the river. I also changed the name of the company. No longer Cane Link Supply. Now it was Crane Ridge Logistics. Clean, corporate, scalable. That name is on 5 buildings today, each one with tinted glass, chrome signage, and smart card access. But I wasn't done. I was playing the long game. And I wasn't just going to succeed. I was going to circle the block and make them ask me for help. I just had to wait. And when they came, I'd give them the exact thing they gave me. Not a slap, not a scream, but a choice. Beg or starve. Just like they taught me. You'd think the first time I saw them again, I'd feel something. Rage. Hatred. Maybe that sick twist in the stomach that comes from being near old trauma. But I didn't feel a damn thing. It was winter. The kind of Midwest gray that makes you question if the sun ever really existed. I was in Indianapolis, overseeing the opening of a new fulfillment center. It was supposed to be a routine ribbon cutting, some local press, a handshake with the mayor, photo ops. All marketing. I just stepped outside to take a call when I heard someone call my name. Not Tyler. Not Mr. Kane. Just, hey, Tyler. Tyler Kane, is that you? The voice was older, scratchy, feminine, and somehow I knew before I turned around. Joyce Kane was standing on the sidewalk, bundled in a red coat that looked 3 sizes too big. Her hair was brittle and yellowed, tucked under a Walmart beanie. She looked like a woman who had fought the wind and lost, skin like old leather, eyes ringed in purple. The years had not been kind to her. Behind her was Neil, still tall, still silent, now hunched like a man who'd carried too many things that weren't his. His work boots were cracked. His face was gaunt. They looked defeated. I turned slowly. Let them see me. Not react. Not smile. Just look. Joyce gasped. Actually gasped. Jesus, look at you. I was in a tailored wool coat, leather gloves, Italian shoes. Clean-shaven, healthy, whole. I looked like everything she never wanted me to be. Hi, Mom, I said, calm as a still pond. She blinked, stunned at the word. It is you. My God. We saw your name in the paper. Crane Ridge. That's your company? Yes. I told him, she said, hitting Neil on the arm. Didn't I tell you it was him? I said, that's our boy. Look at you. I mean, how long's it been? I shrugged. About 20 years. Neil finally spoke. You look good, son. Son. That word slid off him like it was still warm. I wondered if he practiced it. Joyce rushed in, fumbling for something. A hug, maybe, and I took a step back. Not dramatically. Just enough. She paused. Her hands went stiff. You're not still mad, are you? She said, forcing a laugh. We all said things, but that was a long time ago. Said things. That was how she phrased it. Not beat you. Not worked you like a slave. Not humiliated you every day of your childhood. No, just said things. I'm not mad, I said, and I meant it. I didn't feel anger. I felt control. I was the one standing tall now. She tried to smile. So, you've done well for yourself. We're proud. We always knew you had it in you. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then, no, you didn't. Her lips twitched. Neil looked down. I remember what you said when I left. I continued. You said I'd never survive out there. That I was weak, lazy, that the world would eat me alive. Joyce was already shaking her head. We didn't mean. But you were right, I said. The world is brutal. But it didn't eat me. I learned to eat it. They went quiet. And then, right on cue, came the pitch. Joyce cleared her throat, lowering her voice like we were old friends sharing secrets. Truth is, we've had a rough time lately. After we lost the house, we bounced around. He's been out of work, and my hours got cut. I didn't interrupt. And we were thinking, maybe you'd be willing to help. Just something to get us back on our feet. Doesn't have to be much. A loan, maybe. We'll pay you back. You know we're good for it. I raised an eyebrow. You want money? No, she said quickly. Not want. Just need. We're family. Interesting, I said. You said I wasn't part of this family anymore. That was a long time ago, Joyce snapped. Neil finally raised his eyes. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, Tyler. We just need a little help. Oh, there it was. The shift. from condescension to pleading, from control to supplication. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a leather card holder. Slowly, deliberately, they leaned forward like beggars watching a coin fall. I took out a card and handed it to Joyce. She turned it over, confused. This is a website. Yeah. What's it for? It's the application form for the Crane Ridge Emergency Fund. I smiled just a little. We have a foundation for hardship cases. You can apply there. Include your debt history, tax forms, proof of income. We'll review it in 6 to 8 weeks. Her face twisted. You want us to apply for help? You're asking for money from a business, I said. That's how business works. Neil looked at me then, not with anger, with shame. The same expression I'd worn for the first 17 years of my life. Joyce gritted her teeth. So that's it, huh? You won't help your own parents unless they jump through hoops? I stared at her for a long moment, then tilted my head slightly and said, You're just not trying hard enough. She flinched, visibly. The words cut deeper than a knife ever could. I what? That's what you used to say, right? Every time I said I was tired, or hurt, or hungry, you said I wasn't trying hard enough. She looked like she might spit, or cry, or both. I stepped back. Apply. Don't apply. I don't care either way. But if you do apply and lie on the form, we'll report it. Fraud's a felony. Neil muttered something under his breath. I ignored it. Joyce stared at the card like it was poison. I told you he was twisted, she said. I always said it. There's something wrong in your head. I smiled, wide this time. And yet, here you are, begging. They didn't follow me as I walked back into the building. Didn't call my name again. Didn't try to argue. They knew. They finally, fully knew. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and stood by the window of my downtown hotel, watching the snow fall. The city glowed beneath me. I had a dinner with investors in the morning. A warehouse acquisition next week in Nashville. New contracts pending in Kentucky. And back in whatever hole they crawled out of, Joyce and Neil Kane were sitting with that business card, holding the very system they once beat me with. Now they were the ones waiting for approval, for mercy, for a chance. And I would leave them waiting. Because this isn't about punishment. It's about demonstration. They taught me that love is conditional. That value is measured in utility. That weakness gets nothing. And I learned the lesson well. Power doesn't make you loud. It makes you quiet. When I was young, still hunched under the weight of their words, still flinching at every raised voice, I thought success would be a roar. I imagined standing on a stage, shouting my worth to the world, shaming them into regret. But that's not how it works. Real power moves without sound. It steps lightly. It whispers. It doesn't demand attention. It commands it, simply by existing. By 31, I had mastered that silence. I wasn't just rich. I was established. 3 companies, 1 holding group, 2 commercial real estate ventures in Ohio and Tennessee. I had a private financial advisor, legal counsel, and a strategy team that operated like a quiet little war room. Crane Ridge Logistics had expanded into national contracts, warehousing, fleet leasing, distribution optimization. We'd streamlined procurement for entire school districts and partnered with a federal supply chain restructuring initiative. Everything was white-labeled, behind the scenes, profitable and invisible. And I liked it that way, because the more invisible I was, the more visible they became. It started with small things. Their car got repossessed. I bought the lot that did it. The diner where Joyce worked shortened hours. I acquired the parent company 6 months later, quietly, through shell entities. And I ordered a strategic restructuring. She lost her job on a rainy Wednesday in March. She still doesn't know I was the one who signed the document. Neil filed for unemployment after injuring his back at a garage in Fort Wayne. The clinic he went to for therapy? Bought out. Absorbed into a for-profit chain owned by a firm in my portfolio. They changed their billing policy. He couldn't afford the copay. His treatment stopped. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel anything at all. Because this was never about hurting them. It was about reminding them, slowly, inch by inch, decision by decision, that the world now bends to the man they once deemed worthless. But I didn't stop there. Revenge, I learned, is an ecosystem. It doesn't have to burn fast and bright. It can bloom. It can thrive like ivy, winding itself into everything until the roots run deep and irreversible. I began collecting leverage, not just on my parents, but on anyone who ever sneered, laughed, spat down. There was Mrs. Landry, my middle school math teacher, who once told me I was wasting everyone's time and held me after class just to call me dead weight. I bought her mortgage from a debt portfolio. Delinquent. Quietly placed a lien. She still gets notices from a firm she's never heard of. There was Connor Blake, my first shift manager at Dalton's, who used to accidentally short my tips and once called me a charity case. He now manages a cleaning crew subcontracted by one of my janitorial subsidiaries. He works for a company he doesn't even know is mine. His hours are capped. His raise is frozen. I didn't ruin their lives. I didn't have to. I just kept them stuck, exactly the way they once tried to keep me. That was the point. I started therapy at 33. Not because I thought I needed to heal, but because my lawyer recommended it. Said investors liked a man who could say emotional intelligence with a straight face. Dr. Keller was in his 50s. Silver beard. Wall full of degrees. He asked a lot of open-ended questions at first, clearly expecting me to circle around my trauma. I told him flatly, I don't have trauma. I have memory. That's different. He tilted his head. And what do those memories make you feel? Cold. That sounds lonely. I shrugged. Not really. Ice is clean. He didn't press. Instead, he asked something else. Something sharper. Are you trying to become something? I nodded. And what is that? A mirror. He paused, confused. For who? My past. I got my first media profile at 35. Fortune Business Weekly. They called me a self-made logistics king and praised my relentless work ethic. They used words like visionary, resilient, innovative. I smiled when I read it, not because I believed it, but because I knew who else would read it. My phone rang a week after the article dropped. Blocked number. I answered. Tyler. It was Joyce's voice, quieter now. Not the bark I remembered. More like a whimper wrapped in politeness. Speaking. I saw the article, she said. That's really something. You're really something. I waited. She didn't disappoint. We were wondering if you'd be willing to meet. Maybe dinner? Your father and we'd like to talk. Just catch up. I already knew she was living in a subsidized apartment in Muncie. That Neil was doing DoorDash deliveries 3 days a week. That they were behind on utilities and Joyce had tried to pawn her wedding ring 2 weeks ago. This wasn't reconciliation. This was positioning. I gave her a time. A place. Downtown Indianapolis. Expensive enough to make her uncomfortable. She agreed, too quickly. The dinner was pathetic. They showed up dressed like they were going to a church funeral. Neil wore a blazer at least 15 years old. Joyce had lipstick on her teeth. They both looked like they hadn't eaten in 2 days, but tried to pretend they were fine. I let them order whatever they wanted. I made no conversation. Joyce tried to make small talk. About how Mason had grown up, he's in Portland, runs a record store, apparently. About the old neighborhood, about the good times. There were none. Neil finally got to it. We were hoping, maybe you'd be willing to help us get back on our feet. Just a small investment. Something to stabilize us. Maybe a down payment on a place. He actually said investment, like this was a pitch. I sipped my wine and nodded. What collateral do you offer? Joyce blinked. Excuse me. This would be a loan, right? What are you putting up as collateral? She looked insulted. We're your parents. And I said, you don't lend based on guilt. You lend based on return. Neil muttered, Jesus Christ. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. When I was 12, you worked me like a mule and called me lazy. You fed me scraps, beat me for resting, and told me I'd die in the gutter. Now you want to pretend none of it happened? Joyce's lips trembled. We didn't know better. No, I said. You just didn't care. They said nothing. And in that silence, I finished my wine and stood. Thank you for coming. Dinner's paid for. Don't contact me again. Joyce stood, frantic. Tyler, please, we're your family. I looked at her one last time. Calm. Controlled. Like a CEO firing a failed applicant. You failed the interview, I said. You don't get the job. Then I walked away. People ask me sometimes what drives me. Investors. Journalists. Partners. I always smile and give the same answer. I'm just trying to prove my worth. But that's not true. I'm not proving anything anymore. I'm just collecting interest. No one tells you that winning feels like nothing. They paint it in movies like some grand climax. Music swelling, crowds cheering, the underdog raising his fists to the sky while the villains fall away in disgrace. But in real life, victory is quiet, empty. It arrives in an empty room, long after the battle's ended, when you're alone with your reflection and there's no one left to beat. I was 36 when I realized I had no one to call. It hit me on a Thursday. The final paperwork had just come through. Crane Ridge had successfully acquired a competitor in Illinois, giving us full regional control of commercial freight across the tri-state area. A 10-year chess match finally complete. I stood in my Chicago penthouse, overlooking the skyline with a tumbler of aged bourbon in hand, the city glittering beneath me like a board I now owned. And I felt nothing. Not pride, not joy, just completion, a checkbox ticked, a box sealed, a chapter turned. My phone buzzed. It was my assistant, Melissa. Congratulations, Tyler. News broke 15 minutes ago. Cranes called it a ruthless consolidation of market power. Investors are thrilled. I texted back a thumbs-up emoji, the kind people send when they don't want to keep talking. She replied, "Do you want to celebrate? I can book something. A dinner? Drinks? We still have that reservation at Comey." I stared at the message and realized I didn't want to see anyone. Not a team, not a woman, not even the bottle in my hand. Because success wasn't the summit I thought it would be. It was just a plateau, wide, high, lonely, and cold. Don't mistake me. I wasn't depressed. I was precise. Still am. My days were ordered, efficient, mechanical. Wake up at 4:45. Workout. Read earnings reports. Track logistics KPIs. Approve or deny deals. Micromanage nothing, but see everything. My calendar was a fortress. My staff operated like a clock. Every variable was accounted for. Every risk measured. But one morning, while shaving, I caught myself in the mirror and stared too long. It was the first time in years I'd really looked. And I saw no one. The boy who slept on plywood was gone. The kid with raw fingers and cracked lips, scrubbing floors for affection, erased. What stood in his place was a tailored machine. And behind the eyes, only strategy, only hunger. That same week, I got a letter. An actual physical letter. No return address. Handwritten. It was from Mason, my little brother. I hadn't seen or heard from him in nearly 20 years. "Hey, Tyler. I got your business card from Mom. She kept it all these years, in a shoebox with your name on it. You probably don't care, but I wanted to say. I remember. Everything. What they did to you. How they treated you. I didn't understand it back then. I was just a kid. But I saw it. And I'm sorry I didn't do anything. I know you probably don't want anything to do with me. That's okay. I run a record store in Portland now. Small. Independent. I don't make much, but it's honest. Anyway, if you ever want to talk, not about them, not about money, just about life, you've got my number now. If you don't call, I'll understand." It was signed your brother, Mason. No ask. No manipulation. No backdoor pitch. Just sincerity. I stared at that letter longer than I should have. Put it in a drawer. Didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know how. Relationships are like muscle tissue. If you don't use them, they atrophy. And I'd starved mine to dust. The women I'd dated over the years were all transactional, polished, poised, ambitious. Attractive, yes. Compatible on paper. But I never let them see past the first layer. I wasn't cruel. I just didn't offer warmth. Because I'd never been taught how to give it. One of them, Samantha, a finance exec I saw for almost 6 months, once said, "Being with you feels like standing next to a fire that never gives off heat." She left a week later. And I didn't stop her. The press had begun to notice. I started getting strange questions from interviewers. Not about revenue, or expansion, or business strategy. About me. "Tyler, your story's remarkable. Do you ever think about reconciling with your past? What's it like, emotionally, to go from abandoned to admired? Do you think your success has cost you something?" I smiled for the cameras. I gave them the lines they wanted. But later, I'd sit in the back of my chauffeured car, watching the rain bead down the tinted windows, and wonder, did I build a kingdom or a cage? Did I escape them or just become them? Cleaner, smarter, untouchable? One night, I was in Charlotte for a corporate retreat. I took a walk alone, headphones in, coat collar up, the city humming around me. I passed a homeless man sitting near a fountain. He looked up, eyes sunken, fingers shaking, held out a hand. "Got anything to spare?" I froze. For a second, a full, visceral second, I saw my father in his face. Not the man he'd been, but the man he might become. Broken, battered, beaten by a world he no longer understood. I reached for my wallet, paused, then handed him nothing. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to know I still could walk away. And I did. When I got back to the hotel, There was a voicemail waiting for me. Melissa, hesitant. Her voice lowered. Hey, Tyler, just a heads up. Your parents filed for bankruptcy this week. Chapter 7. It's public record. They listed you as a possible creditor, probably hoping the court would pressure you to settle their debts. Let me know if you want legal to crush it. I poured myself a drink. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because that wasn't the real headline. The real headline was this. They used my name as a lifeline. They still thought I owed them. Still thought they were entitled to even my shadow. And somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the machine I'd become, I felt something stir. Not pity. Not sadness. Not rage. Curiosity. Was this the final note? The last act in the opera? Or was there more? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in years, I didn't think about business, or profit, or logistics. I thought about Mason, and plywood, and how revenge might not end when the target falls. But when you finally ask, now what? It starts with a silence. Not the kind that follows defeat, but the kind that precedes an earthquake. I stood in the boardroom of Crane Ridge Global Holdings, staring out at the skyline of Atlanta. A new city, a new market, a new headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a kingdom of my own making. Behind me, my executives sat waiting. Lawyers, economists, strategists, all of them paid to think, to execute, to obey. I didn't turn around as I spoke. It's time to stop playing regional. We go national. In the months that followed, I began my quiet conquest. Not with noise, not with flashy PR campaigns or viral headlines, but the way real power moves, through shell acquisitions, backdoor deals, and leverage buried in data. I bought controlling interest in a rail logistics firm out of Denver, secured long-haul freight assets in New Mexico under a different name, bought distribution real estate in upstate New York through a partnership tied to an offshore trust. No one saw the web, but I did. And by the time they noticed, it would be too late to resist. This wasn't business anymore. It was engineering. Not the kind with steel beams and concrete. The kind made of pressure, regulation, code, human capital. I didn't want wealth. I wanted infrastructure. Because wealth can be taxed, targeted, taken. But when you own the systems people rely on to eat, to move, to breathe, you don't have power. You are power. It's funny. My legal team once joked, "You're becoming the villain they always said you were." I told them that was the point. They laughed. But I didn't. Because I remember the face of Neil Kane when I walked out of that diner. The flicker of hope. The quiet, broken plea. The way his shoulders folded inward like a man who finally understood helplessness. That was the moment I knew. I would never settle for revenge. I wanted evolution. Mason called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Tyler, I read about the expansion. Congratulations. Seriously, you're doing things none of us could even imagine. I just hope you're happy. You know? Like, not just winning, but okay. If you ever want to grab a drink, I'll be here. Take care, big brother." I deleted the message. Not because I hated him, but because peace is the currency of the weak. And I had no interest in balance. The Kane Foundation, the public-facing philanthropic wing I created 3 years ago to buffer my reputation, had recently expanded into financial literacy programs and bankruptcy counseling. I made sure one of our case managers was assigned to Joyce and Neil. No special treatment. No exceptions. Just one number in a sea of anonymous applications. They were denied assistance. Reason? Lack of effort. Failure to provide adequate documentation. History of financial irresponsibility. Just like the words they'd spat at me. But now stamped in digital ink, on official Crane Ridge letterhead, from a server I owned, under a name I invented. They had become exactly what they feared. Not poor, not broken, but forgettable. My assistant, Melissa, brought in 2 reports that afternoon. One was an acquisition file. The other was a personal letter. She looked nervous. "This one's from your father." I raised an eyebrow, took the envelope, opened it. Inside, one line in shaky pen. "We were wrong." That was it. No signature, no return address. Just the bitter ink of regret. I folded the paper, placed it in my desk drawer, on top of the letter Mason sent. Then I told Melissa, "Schedule the buyout of Cormark Transit. Kill their stock. Bleed them out." She hesitated. "You want to drag it out?" "Pain is slow," I said. "Make it elegant." She nodded and walked out. That night, I flew to D.C. to speak at a logistics symposium. The ballroom was full of men in suits worth less than my watch. I walked on stage to applause, delivered my keynote, talked about efficiency, supply resilience, economic stabilization through scalable integration. All lies. All true. Afterward, I shook hands with senators, lobbyists, executives. Everyone wanted something. I gave them nothing, except a smile. Later, in the hotel suite, I sat alone with my laptop. I pulled up a digital dashboard. Every asset, every acquisition, every contract, every projected margin. Billions. But it didn't feel like success anymore. It felt like inevitability. I wasn't chasing approval, or justice, or love. I was chasing totality. Because when you've been powerless, truly powerless, you never forget the taste. And once you've tasted blood, you don't stop hunting. They called me ruthless in the press. Said I had no soul, no heart. They were right. Because I carved mine out a long time ago, in a garage with a plywood bed, between the smell of piss and gasoline and shame. That boy died there, and I buried him with precision. In his place stands a man with no leash, no guilt, no doubt. Only momentum. There is no forgiveness. There is no reunion. There is only the system. And now, I am the system. I was 39 when I realized I could no longer remember my mother's voice. Not her words. I remember those. Every bitter syllable. Every insult wrapped in fake righteousness. But her actual voice, the texture of it, the rhythm? Gone. Erased. That's what power does if you wear it long enough. It burns away the excess. And eventually, even memory becomes inefficient. By now, Crane Ridge Holdings controlled 11% of all commercial freight infrastructure in the continental U.S. Our name appeared in no headlines. Our board was faceless. Our operations, decentralized. I had 57 LLCs under a dozen verticals. I was pulling strings in regulatory frameworks that senators didn't understand. There were towns where I owned every truck stop, warehouse, shipping lane, and vending machine. If the country stopped moving, it would be because I allowed it to. And yet, the air up here? Still. Cold. Thin. I lived in a Blackstone penthouse in Manhattan now. Walls of glass. Imported everything. No personal photos. No guests. No noise. My chef didn't speak to me unless asked. My driver never made eye contact. My house manager changed linens while I was at the office, so I'd never see her. I had constructed a life of frictionless existence. No affection. No intimacy. No unpredictability. Not because I feared it, but because I'd outgrown it. Mason wrote again. Not a letter this time. A package. Inside, a vinyl record. Handwritten note taped to the cover. This album got me through some hard winters. Thought you might like it. No strings. No questions. Just a gift. It was Springsteen. I didn't listen to it, but I kept it. Put it on a shelf in a glass case where no one would ever see it. A trophy of something I couldn't name. At 40, I was approached by a venture group from Singapore. They wanted to acquire Crane Ridge's European expansion wing. Offered 9 figures. Clean. All cash. I declined. Not because I needed the company, but because I needed them to want it. Wanting is control. I didn't do this for profit anymore. I did it to remain gravity. Because there's only one thing harder than escaping poverty. Escaping the boy who never forgot it. That same year, my legal team brought me a new document. It was a claim, a quiet one, filed by an overworked paralegal in rural Indiana. A request for guardianship of Joyce Kane. Alzheimer's. She'd been placed in a state care facility. Could no longer remember her name on most days. Had tried to write letters to someone named Ty. Didn't remember why. Didn't remember what she'd done. The request was procedural. They needed to notify next of kin. Technically, I was it. I went. Not because I cared, but because I wanted to see the ending. The true ending. The one with no applause. No cameras. No climax. Just entropy. The facility was clean, bleak. Smelled of bleach and resignation. A nurse led me to a room with pale walls and a window that looked out over dead grass. Joyce was in a chair, facing the glass. Hair gray and limp. A blanket over her knees. Thin wrists. Empty eyes. She turned, slowly. Her lips moved. Ty. The name hit like a forgotten draft. I didn't answer. She blinked. Smiled weakly. You're one of the good ones, aren't you? I looked at her. At the emptiness where malice used to live. And I realized something. She hadn't been destroyed. She'd simply been undone. Unwoven by time. Every scar she left in me. Every humiliation. Every crack she dug into the foundation of my soul. She didn't remember any of it. To her, it was smoke. And to me, it was everything. I leaned in, whispered, "You don't deserve to forget." Then I turned and left. Didn't look back. Didn't authorize the guardianship. Let the state handle her. Because forgiveness is a form of attention. And I had none left to give. The next day, I took a private flight to Tokyo for a trade summit. My name was on every tongue. Every handshake came with reverence. I didn't speak unless it was profitable. I met with ministers, signed treaties, moved nations like chess pieces. But that night, back in the suite overlooking the bay, I took out the Springsteen record, set it on the player, pressed the needle down, and sat, just listened, not for nostalgia, not for emotion, but for proof that I still could. The song played, something about lost highways and rusted hearts. And for one brief, fractured moment, I saw the garage again, saw the boy with cracked hands, the plywood bed, the smell of gasoline, the voice screaming, lazy, through a cloud of cigarette smoke. And then I blinked, and the vision was gone. I poured a drink, neat, raised the glass, and said, softly to no one, I won. Not with triumph, not with relief, just with certainty. Then I turned off the record, and went to sleep, alone, unchallenged, unforgiven, and undefeated.